I want to tell you a story about my mom and something that happened before I was born. It's one of those things that doesn't have a clear explanation, and even though she doesn't like to dwell on it, it has stuck with her for over 25 years. When my mom was pregnant with me, she and my dad took a trip to Colorado for a 4-day weekend with a couple they've been friends with since high school. They had rented a cabin in the mountains, somewhere about 2 hours outside of Denver. It was mid-November, so the weather was cold, but there wasn't much snow on the ground yet. She said the cabin was on the smaller side, tucked back into the woods with a big stone fireplace and large windows that looked out at the forest. The first night they were there was completely normal. My mom, being about 4 months pregnant with me, spent most of the night bundled up on the couch while my dad and their friends played cards and made hot drinks. She told me that she remembered feeling very calm that night, like the cabin had a soothing energy to it. She was definitely happy to be there and was really excited about being a mom. That first night they went to bed early because they were tired from traveling, and she slept deeply, which she said was rare for her during her pregnancy. I guess waking up every half hour and tossing around in bed to find a comfortable position was more the norm for her. The second night, though, was wildly different. My mom said she woke up just after midnight feeling the familiar and annoying urge to use the bathroom. She got out of bed quietly to not wake my dad up and walked down the short hallway to the bathroom. The cabin was dead quiet except for the light crackle of the dying fire in the living room. She didn't think anything of it at the time, just another middle-of-the-night trip to the bathroom. The small bathroom in the cabin had a single window in it with frosted glass for privacy, and as she sat down, she noticed something strange outside. She could see bright, flashing lights coming through the window, lighting up the frosted glass in pulses. She said it reminded her of when a police car's lights flash, but these weren't red and blue, they were all the same white color, and they seemed to be moving around. At first, she thought it might be headlights from a car pulling in, but the cabin was somewhat remote and had a long gravel driveway, so there shouldn't be anyone on it, especially at that time of the night. The lights were close, too, and it looked like they were right outside the cabin. She remembers sitting there, staring at the window, trying to figure out what was going on. Then the lights seemed to circle that side of the cabin, moving in this weird rhythmic pattern. She started to stand up to go wake up my dad or one of their friends, but before she could fully get up, she felt an overwhelming wave of sleepiness hit her. She describes it as a bit of a lightheadedness mixed with her whole body feeling physically tired, but not in a startling or scary way. 1 second she was awake and trying to stand up, the next she was sitting back down and leaning her head against the wall, totally unable to fight the drowsiness. Her very next memory is waking up the next morning. She was still sitting on the toilet in the bathroom with her head against the wall, but now the bright early morning sun was coming through the window. Her neck was stiff, her legs had fallen asleep, and she had a pounding headache. She felt groggy, disoriented, and totally shocked that she had fallen asleep in the bathroom and in such an uncomfortable position. She had never done anything like that in her life. At the time, she chalked it up to being pregnant and traveling all day, but she told me that something about it never felt right. She couldn't stop feeling like something else had happened that night, even though she had no memory of anything beyond seeing the lights and feeling that sleepiness. Over the following days of their vacation, she tried to brush it off, but the experience left her uneasy and it was hard for her to have fun. She said she was a little worried something might be wrong with the pregnancy, but after that first morning, she was feeling perfectly fine. Then, while they were making their last breakfast at the cabin and packing up to leave, they happened to see a short local news story on TV about strange lights being seen in the area. Several residents and people camping at the state park down the road from the cabin had reported seeing lights in the sky on the same night my mom had her experience. Hearing that only made her feel more uneasy, and at this point she just wanted to go home. In the weeks that followed that trip, she did have a doctor's appointment, and everything seemed to be perfectly fine with her and the pregnancy, but around that same time she started having vivid, recurring dreams. In these dreams, there would always be someone or something trying to take her baby. I guess the dreams were so intense that she would wake up sweating and lashing out at my dad in bed. She said they weren't like normal pregnancy dreams, which for her were just weird for no reason and made no sense. These felt like something actually happening to her in real life. After about a month, though, the dreams stopped, but the memory of them stayed with her for a long time. She told me all about this when I was a teenager, and it's become a bit of a family joke that I'm different because of what happened to Mom. My two younger siblings are very similar in personality, easygoing, down-to-earth, and normal, but I've always been the odd one out. I'm more analytical, more intense and organized, and not bragging, but much better academically. And sometimes they joke that it's because I have partial alien DNA from whatever happened that night. My mom laughs it off most of the time, but she still doesn't like talking about it that much. I feel like it scared her a lot more than she says it did, and she just holds it back. I know her, and I can actually see the fear in her face when she talks about it. She has never been one to exaggerate or make up stories, and the fact that she still doesn't like talking about what happened makes me believe she experienced something truly scary. Whether it was just exhaustion and pregnancy mixed with a weird coincidence or something more, I guess we'll never really know, but it's one of those stories that pulled me in from the first time I heard it. It's part mystery, part memory, and it's a story that I was part of too. Whatever happened to her happened to me. I was there with her, and that is so weird to me when I think about it. Back in the summer of 2006, my family and I were spending a weekend at our vacation house on Lake Erie. I've gone there every year since I was a kid, and it was one of the things I most look forward to every summer. On one of the nights, around 9:30 or 10 o'clock, my family and I gathered down by a small fire pit that we had on the back of our property and close to the beach. The fire was crackling, and we were all just sitting in chairs, relaxing and talking, when something in the sky caught my eye. I looked up and saw what I assumed to be an airplane heading north. It had blinking lights like a plane, and it was moving at a typical speed and seemed unremarkable at first glance. But then something else appeared to the right of it. It looked like another aircraft, also with blinking lights, but coming from a different direction. I pointed it out, and as I did, my mom saw a third one moving in yet another direction. Within moments, my dad and sister chimed in, pointing out several additional lights in the sky. One by one, they kept appearing, coming from different parts of the sky until there were 10 of them in total. It was a very unusual sight, and we quickly realized this was not normal. These aircraft weren't maintaining any kind of flight path. Instead, they were converging in the same general area, just barely out over the lake and almost directly above us. It felt like we were witnessing something extraordinary. My first thought was that we were about to see a mid-air collision. As they got closer to each other, their movements became very erratic. Their proximity to each other was unnerving too. The speed and agility of the way they were flying was unlike anything I've ever seen from airplanes. It was like they were performing some kind of aerial show, but it felt chaotic and unpredictable at the same time. I should also mention that we couldn't hear a thing other than the waves hitting the shore. We all stood there completely frozen, watching this bizarre display. Then from the west, something else appeared, heading straight for the 10 smaller lights. Whatever this was, it was huge, easily 10 times the size of any commercial jet. I had to really stare at it because until it got closer, I thought it might just be an optical illusion where several smaller lights could be making it look bigger. But as it got closer, it was clear that this thing was enormous. Its shape vaguely resembled a plane, but there was something off about it that I couldn't quite put my finger on. The lights it had were distinct, one on the nose, one on the tail, and one on either side, and it was so large that it completely blotted out the stars behind it, so I knew it was one solid object. This massive craft moved steadily right into the center of the chaotic cluster of smaller aircraft. As it did, the smaller ones seemed to change their behavior. All 10 of them started flying in a slow circle around the larger object, like they were aligning themselves intentionally for some reason. We still heard absolutely no sounds at all from whatever was going on up there. No low jet engine hum in the distance, no helicopter blades. It was just perfectly normal, quiet lake sounds. And then, at the same time, all of the smaller aircraft took off in different directions. They moved so quickly that within seconds we couldn't see them anymore. The large craft, however, didn't follow, and it stayed right in the same place. It didn't move in any discernible direction. It just sat there for maybe a full minute, and then its lights went off. It didn't fade out, they just switched off, and we really couldn't tell if it was even there anymore. I remember straining my eyes to see if the main part of it was still blocking out some of the stars, but I couldn't find it or see anything anywhere. My whole family just stood there staring up at the sky and asking each other a million questions about what we'd just seen. The consensus was clear. Whatever had just happened, it was not normal. My mom, who has always been fascinated by the idea of extraterrestrial life, was convinced that what we saw was alien in origin. My dad, however, suggested that it had to have been some kind of military exercise, though even he admitted that the flight patterns and the size of the large craft were unlike anything he'd ever seen or heard of. I was on my dad's side and thought that it had to be some kind of crazy military exercise over the lake, but I was truly astonished at the way these things flew, and I couldn't get over the fact that none of us heard a single thing. After that night, it's really all we could talk about. Over the next few days, we scoured the local news and checked online, hoping to find some kind of explanation. We couldn't find anything. Not a single mention of any kind of weird sightings or unusual activity in the skies that night. We felt like we were crazy, and that at a minimum, dozens of people had to have seen this. It was the middle of summer, and there was no shortage of people at the lake. This lack of acknowledgement only added to the mystery and left us with so many more questions than answers. In the years since that night, I've replayed the events in my mind, trying to figure out what we could have witnessed. My gut still tells me it was some kind of advanced military technology being tested, but the way the smaller lights were darting around and how that large craft seemingly disappeared without a trace still baffles me. If it was our military, all I can say is I'm glad I live in America. If we have those kinds of aerial capabilities, I wouldn't want to be on the receiving end of it. Occasionally, though, I'll open my mind to it being something else, like something not from here. I don't like to go down that rabbit hole because it gives me this deep, weird fear. The thought of us actually seeing something extraterrestrial is just something my brain can't handle. My parents sold that house in 2015, so we don't go to that part of the lake anymore, but I do still go to other areas with my wife and our 2 kids at least once a year. I've spent a lot of time looking, and I have yet to see anything out of the ordinary even once. It's been nearly 2 decades now, and I'm still without any clear idea or answer. Whatever that was, it was extraordinary, and I don't think I'll ever see anything like it again in my lifetime. I feel genuinely lucky to have seen it, but at the same time, it gave me a deep fear that I can't really explain. First of all, I grew up in an area of southwest Washington considered a hotspot for sightings during the late 70s and through the 80s. MUFON, or the Mutual UFO Network, and similar groups would occasionally come to watch for lights and look into these sightings. The locals even have a legend about what they call the Burnt Ridge lights. These were lights that moved in a way that seemed to defy logic. Lights making sharp turns, flying at incredible speeds, hovering, and flying without sound. These events stopped happening sometime in the 90s as far as I know. I personally saw the lights more than once in my life, but that is just the tip of the iceberg. Back when I was young, our neighbor was an old, drunken lout of a farmer who claimed aliens would land in his field regularly. He was pretty much ignored by everyone due to his reputation, but around that time something unusual happened to me, and this is how I remember it. One night I woke up because the lights were on outside of our house, or at least I thought they were. I realized that there were bright lights shining in our windows. I was seeing red, green, blue, and white lights that didn't flash, they just changed color. I walked through the house following the lights as they moved from one side to the other, as if something outside was circling the property. The eerie thing was, the lights would have had to pass through a shed and a large mature tree to stay as close to the house as they did. I realized this when I got older, but at the time I didn't seem to notice. I followed the lights until they suddenly went out, which happened right outside my parents' bedroom, but I noticed it wasn't dark anymore. It had definitely been nighttime when I first woke up, but now the sun was up and it was early morning. My mom looked at me and asked me what I was doing, and I guess I told her that I was talking to the aliens. Those are her words, not mine. I don't recall exactly what I said, but she swears to this day I said I was talking to the aliens. Not long after that, I randomly developed imaginary friends. I would have dreams about 2 other children that I somehow thought lived under our house and in a clubhouse kind of setting. I would visit them in my dreams often, and I truly believed they were real. Eventually, these dreams stopped, but the odd thing about them was they had no correlation to anything or anyone in my real life. The 2 children didn't look like anyone I knew, and their names weren't from anyone I had ever met. I still clearly remember them too. They were Jamie and Joel. I don't recall anything specific about what we did in my dreams other than playing with them, but every single time I woke up from the dreams, I would get that sensation where you're falling and you jerk awake. As my life went on, I completely forgot about Jamie and Joel and the weird lights people used to see where I grew up. That was until the X-Files debuted in 1993. I think it was the very first episode that featured Mulder remembering his sister being abducted. I was watching that with my parents, and my mom asked me why I was crying during the abduction scene. I didn't even know I was crying until she mentioned it because I was so focused on the show, but there were tears streaming down my face. This is not something a teenage boy wants to have happen in front of his parents, so I got up, went in my room, and went to bed, kind of embarrassed about the whole thing. That night I remember having vivid nightmares about gray, alien-like beings in my house. For some reason, after that I became fixated and fascinated with abduction stories, and especially with the X-Files show. At some point, I read a story about how children who claimed to have been abducted reported that the aliens appeared to them as friendly kids or almost cartoon characters in a way. That was when I remembered Jamie and Joel, which led to me seriously starting to wonder if I had been abducted as a child. Eventually, I guess you could say I grew out of it and just assumed it was something I concocted from a combination of bad dreams and an active imagination. But around 1996 or 97, something else happened when I was up at a friend's house at night. We were out in his field around a small fire when we noticed something very large moving across the sky and blocking out parts of the stars. It was jet black and triangular in shape, so we couldn't make out any of the details clearly, but it moved slowly and silently, and we were both positive we saw the same thing that night. After that happened, I once again began to think about and fear abductions. I don't know how to explain it, but I was certain they were coming for me. I just didn't know when or where. I felt like I'd been on some kind of list ever since Jamie and Joel came to me as a child, and that no matter what I did or where I was, they would find me. And before you judge me, I know how crazy that sounds, but this is just how I felt. The next part of my story is about my stint in the Army in Iraq and is in 2 parts. While on watch in 2003, 2 other soldiers and I spotted what we thought was a satellite moving across the sky. Then it stopped, hovered, and came lower toward us. We called it in, expecting to be told it was one of ours, but instead we got to witness 2 fighter jets screaming in at God knows what speed to try and intercept whatever this was. The thing took off heading south so fast it left a bizarre trail of light behind it, and the jets, as far as we know, didn't catch it. After my second tour in Iraq, I was getting my head checked for signs of a concussion. They were doing an X-ray and spotted something metallic at the base of my skull near my spine. They assumed it was a small piece of shrapnel, which is possible because I was hit, but I immediately thought of the many stories I'd heard of implants and strange things people have found in their bodies. I asked about getting it removed, but they said it wasn't the safest area to have surgery for such a small object, so I never did anything about it. It's about the size of a BB, and I still have the image from it from the hospital. I guess it's good to know it's there though, because if I didn't know and got an MRI, things could be bad. So that's my story. Well, it's my story so far anyway. Do I believe I was abducted? Do I think Jamie and Joel were part of it all, and maybe the start of my lifelong struggle with this? I honestly don't know. I desperately want to believe none of it is real, because there's not a thing in this world that terrifies me more. I've often considered hypnotic regression therapy because part of me wants to know if anything comes up. But on the other hand, I'm afraid of what I might learn.